Hi, my name's Ann Haber, and today I'm going to demonstrate the anatomy of the female reproductive system. This is a lateral view of the female pelvis. So we've got the uterus here, the urinary bladder here, the rectum here, posterior pelvic wall, anterior pelvic wall. So again, this is that fundus of the uterus, the body of the uterus, and this is the posterior aspect of the uterus. Here's that broad ligament attaching the uterus to the pelvic wall. And there's a couple of other ligaments that you can see well in this view. This ligament is called the round ligament, and it goes from the fundus of the uterus to the anterior pelvic wall. And this ligament is called the uterosacral ligament, and it goes from the posterior aspect of the uterus to the posterior pelvic wall. Not too easy to see, but here's the fallopian tube with its fimbriae. This is the ovary. And then we'll see better views of the ovarian ligament. And then this is the ureter, emptying into the urinary bladder. This is an image of the uterus. And the uterus is divided into the dome-shaped portion, which is called the fundus, the middle portion, which is the body of the uterus, and the end, the narrowed end here, which is called the cervix. Cervix, body, fundus. And the uterus is made of smooth muscle. And so the muscular wall is called the myometrium. The outer, the outer layer of the uterus is called the perimetrium. We could also call it the serosa. The inner layer of the uterus, which is a vascular layer that is shed during the monthly menstrual cycle, is called the endometrium. The cervix, the narrowed portion, has what's called the cervical canal inside. The cervical canal opens into the body of the uterus. So this area is the cervix. The inner part of the cervix is the cervical canal. The internal cervical os empties into the body of the uterus. The external os empties into or opens into the vagina. So there's very little of the vagina that we can see here. It's also a smooth muscle organ, okay, and it's right here. So the cervix is found at the proximal end of the vagina. So those are the parts of the uterus. The uterus gives rise to the fallopian tubes, or sometimes they're called the oviducts. Okay, fallopian tubes or oviducts. At the end of the oviducts, we have these finger-like projections called fimbriae. And the purpose of the fimbriae is to kind of catch the secondary oocyte, the oocyte that's ovulated, and whisk them into the fallopian tube and down towards the uterus. The uterus has a ligament called the broad ligament, and the broad ligament attaches the uterus to the pelvic wall. There is a portion of the broad ligament that is located between the fallopian tube and the ovary, and that is called the mesovarium. And the ovary itself is linked to the uterus by way of the ovarian ligament. This is a sagittal section of the female pelvis. So we've taken a sagittal section through the uterus, a sagittal section through the urinary bladder. So here we have the pubic symphysis. This section of adipose right here is called the mons pubis. And this, which may be kind of difficult to see, is the clitoris or clitoris. Either pronunciation is correct. And it is analogous to that erectile tissue that we found in the male penis as well. It's very vascular tissue that becomes more vascularized during sexual arousal. This is the labia minora. This is the labia majora. And here we have the external urethral orifice, and here we have the opening of the vagina. And there is sometimes a little piece of membrane here called the hymen. Okay, so remember that the urinary bladder was made of that detrusor muscle, that we had an internal urethral orifice, and it was governed by the internal urethral sphincter, which is involuntarily controlled, that we have the urethra, and as the urethra passes through the floor of the pelvis right about here, you have the urogenital diaphragm, and the external urethral sphincter would be located right here. And then again, here is the external urethral orifice. So this is the opening of the vagina. You can see the ridges of the vagina, which are called rugae in singular, rugae in plural. And the vagina is also a smooth muscle. And the cervix of the uterus is found at the proximal end of the vagina. These pockets have names that I'm not going to name here. And again, here is the whole entire uterus. This would be the fundus, body, cervix, cervical canal. This is unfortunately where a part of the model goes. So the cervical canal's kind of been disrupted, so has the cervix by that opening there. So this is the cervical canal. This would be the internal os. The external os of the cervix again empties out into the vagina. Body of the uterus, fundus of the uterus. Layers of the uterus would be the perimetrium or serosa, myometrium, which is the smooth muscle layer, endometrium, the vascular layer on the inside. And over here, to refresh your memory from the GI system, this is the rectum, this is the anal canal, and we have skeletal muscle, smooth muscle and skeletal muscle sphincters governing the opening of the anus. The smooth muscle would be the internal anal sphincters, and the skeletal muscle would be the external anal sphincter. Internal, involuntarily controlled. External, voluntarily controlled. This is a model of the ovary. So here is the ovary. This is the fallopian tube or the oviduct. It has an ampulla as it opens up, giving rise to these fimbriae here. So out here, the oviduct or the fallopian tube would continue on and ultimately attach to the uterus. And here we have the ovarian ligament, which would ultimately attach to the uterus. This is that mesovarium, which is the part of the broad ligament that is between the fallopian tube and the ovary. The ovary is also suspended from the pelvic wall by the suspensory ligament. So the ovary contains the developing eggs. Okay, so we're born with all of the ova that we will ever have in our ovaries, about 400,000 of them. And they're in various stages of development depending on the female menstrual cycle. So, of note also is that this outside covering of the ovary has the same name as the outside covering of the testis, which was tunica albuginea. So there are the youngest follicles may be present in an ovary, so they are referred to as primordial, which will mature into primary follicles. Ultimately, the follicle is what contains the developing ova. So these follicles contain the developing ova or eggs, okay? And so ultimately those follicles will develop into this follicle. There's our ova here. And that is referred to as the secondary oocyte. And the follicle that it is found in is called the Graafian follicle. Okay, and so at the time of ovulation during the female menstrual cycle, the secondary oocyte will be ejected into the pelvic cavity. And those fimbriae of the fallopian tubes will kind of set up a current. They kind of wave, and they'll set up a current so as to be able to pull that secondary oocyte into the fallopian tube. Now, what's left over after ovulation occurs is this hunk of tissue, which you might say to yourself, just look like a hunk of worthless tissue, but it's not, actually. It's called the corpus luteum, and it is has a major hormonal role of releasing estrogen and progesterone towards the end of the female menstrual cycle or beginning of a pregnancy if that's what's going to occur. This concludes the female reproductive system, where we found the uterus, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, the urinary bladder, and all of the ligaments associated with those organs and structures associated with the ovary itself.